What if I told you that right now, while you're watching this, there are entire American states that the federal government would prefer you just forgot about? Not because they're dangerous, not because they're boring, but because they're free, too free, suspiciously free. The kind of free that makes bureaucrats nervous and tax collectors cry into their spreadsheets. We're talking states where you can build a house without permits, carry weapons the ATF pretends don't exist, and pay less in taxes than what most people spend on their morning Starbucks addiction. States where the Constitution isn't a suggestion, it's actually enforced. Wild concept, I know. And here's the thing, Washington doesn't want you moving there. Because if everyone figured this out, the entire system collapses. The blue states lose taxpayers, the red states lose bragging rights, and suddenly, 5 weird little pockets of America become the most powerful places in the country. These aren't the states you think they are. Texas? Too obvious. Florida? Too crowded. Montana? Already discovered by every tech bro with a Patagonia vest and a podcast about Bitcoin. No, these 5 states are different. They're the ones that slipped through the cracks. The constitutional loopholes that became entire cultures. The places where freedom isn't a talking point, it's a daily reality that would make the founding fathers weep tears of joy. So yeah, let's talk about them. Before Elon buys them and turns them into Mars training facilities, before California notices and tries to replicate their tax codes, they won't. Before the entire eastern seaboard realizes what they've been missing. Quick thing, if you enjoy governmental anxiety and geographic loopholes, hit that like button. Subscribe if you want the algorithm to think you're a prepper. Freedom is cool, but engagement metrics are forever. Plus, every subscription makes a bureaucrat in DC sneeze unexpectedly. That's just science. Let me guess. You're tired of asking permission to exist, tired of paying property taxes on land you supposedly own, tired of HOA Karens telling you your mailbox is the wrong shade of beige, and your garden gnome violates subsection 7.4.2 of the Community Aesthetic Guidelines. Tired of needing 17 permits to install a ceiling fan. Tired of city councils debating for 9 months whether you can paint your fence. Tired of politicians who represent everyone except you. Tired of living in states where the government has more rights than you do, more guns than you're allowed to have, and more access to your bank account than you're comfortable with. You've thought about leaving. Maybe Wyoming, maybe Texas, maybe a cabin in the woods, maybe international waters with Starlink and a fishing rod. But every time you Google freest states in America, you get the same recycled listicles written by people who think low taxes and freedom are the same thing. Written by journalists who've never left Brooklyn. Ranked by think tanks funded by the states that are trying to keep you trapped. They're not the same. Low taxes and freedom. They're related. They're cousins. But one is about money, and the other is about autonomy. About waking up and doing what you want without filling out forms in triplicate. And Washington? Washington loves that confusion, because the states we're about to talk about aren't just low tax, they're low interference. They're places where the government forgot to tighten the leash, where loopholes became culture, where independence isn't a bumper sticker, it's a lifestyle, where don't tread on me isn't ironic, it's zoning policy. And that terrifies the people in charge. Because control requires proximity, bureaucracy requires density. And these 5 states, they're too spread out, too independent, and too constitutionally weird for modern governance to function properly. Here's what they don't tell you in high school civics class. America has 5 states that operate like constitutional cheat codes, places where the rules are different, where the bureaucracy is thin, spread out, underfunded, and occasionally asleep at the wheel. Where you can actually do what you want with your life, your land, and your money without a committee voting on it. These aren't the states you think. And that's exactly why Washington wishes you'd never discover them. Because if you do, if enough people do, the power dynamic shifts, tax revenue relocates, congressional seats follow population, and suddenly, the ignored corners of America become the center of American power. Let's go. Live free or pay someone else's mortgage. New Hampshire's state motto is literally, live free or die, which sounds like something a militia member would get tattooed after 3 whiskeys. But here's what makes DC sweat through their Brooks Brothers suits. They actually mean it. No income tax, no sales tax, no tax on your investments, your side hustle, your crypto gains, or that Etsy shop where you sell candles shaped like Karl Marx. You earn money, you keep money. Revolutionary concept in 2025. Property taxes? Sure. But you're not funding someone's 6-figure pension for stamping documents. You're funding local schools, local roads, local services, the things you can actually see and use. Accountability is built into the system because your neighbor is the tax collector and you see him at the grocery store. Think of New Hampshire as the Costco of states. You pay once at the door, then you're basically left alone. No one's tracking your purchases. No one's auditing your existence. No one's sending you letters about unpaid taxes on digital services you didn't know existed. You just live. And the culture? The culture is aggressively libertarian in that very specific New England way. Not the "don't tread on me" bumper sticker way. More like the "I won't tell you what to do, you won't tell me what to do, and we'll both mind our business" way. It's libertarianism with manners, revolutionary politeness.
The state legislature is massive, 400 representatives for 1.4 million people, which means politicians are cheap, accessible, and terrified of their constituents. You can literally walk up to your representative at the hardware store and tell them why their bill is stupid. They'll probably agree because they only get paid $100 a year to do this job. But here's the ugly reality that keeps New Hampshire from being overrun. It's cold, like existentially cold, philosophically cold.
The kind of cold that makes you question every life choice you've ever made in February when your car won't start and your driveway is buried under 3 feet of snow that somehow appeared overnight. The state government knows this. They know that weather is their natural population control, their moat, their defensive strategy. Because if New Hampshire had California weather, it'd be over. Everyone would move there. Housing prices would explode. The tax model would collapse under the weight of infrastructure demands. So Washington doesn't worry too much about New Hampshire, because Mother Nature is already doing the dirty work. She's the enforcement mechanism, the bouncer at the door of paradise. Punchline: freedom costs $0. Heating bills cost $12,000. Balance in all things. So remote, even the government gave up. Alaska is what happens when America runs out of map and just stops governing. It's the constitutional equivalent of "we'll get to that later" and then never getting to it. You want to build a cabin in the woods? Go ahead. No permits required in unincorporated areas, which is most of Alaska. You want to carry any weapon ever invented? Cool, Alaska doesn't care. You want to live off the grid, raise your own food, homeschool your kids, and avoid human contact for months at a time? Brother, that's not rebellion. That's the state sport. The federal government owns 60% of Alaska. But here's the secret. They don't patrol 60% of Alaska because it's massive, twice the size of Texas, freezing, expensive to access, and full of bears that don't respect jurisdictional boundaries. Here's the metaphor. Alaska is like international waters, but with pizza delivery. Eventually, maybe, if the weather cooperates. Technically part of the system, functionally autonomous, legally ambiguous in the best possible way. And the infrastructure reflects this. Roads that go nowhere, towns accessible only by plane, communities where the mailman arrives once a week by boat. It's frontier life with Amazon Prime, assuming you're willing to wait 3 weeks for shipping. But, and this is the beautiful contradiction that makes economists weep, you also get paid to live there. The Alaska Permanent Fund dividend gives every resident free money every year just for existing in the cold. It's funded by oil revenue. It's UBI, but for people who can field dress a moose and fix a snowmobile with duct tape and prayer. Last year, about $1,300 per person. Not life-changing money, but enough to remind you that sometimes the government can actually give back instead of just taking. Washington hates this model because it proves you can have both freedom and social benefits if you just leave people alone, if you stop micromanaging, if you let resources benefit residents instead of disappearing into bureaucratic black holes. But Alaska also has problems, real problems. Isolation breeds alcoholism. Darkness breeds depression. 6 months of winter breeds philosophical questions about why humans thought living here was a good idea. The suicide rate is high. The cost of living is absurd. A gallon of milk costs $8 in some areas, yet people stay because there's something addictive about true autonomy. About knowing that your nearest neighbor is 3 miles away and respects boundaries. About understanding that if something breaks, you fix it yourself because help isn't coming. Punchline: the government will pay you to disappear into the wilderness. Conspiracy theorists call that suspicious. Alaskans call it Tuesday. And honestly, both are right. A whole state with fewer people than a Travis Scott concert. Wyoming has 580,000 people, total, in the entire state. That's it. You could fit Wyoming's entire population into a single NFL stadium and still have room for nachos, overpriced beer, and a halftime show. Rhode Island has twice the population. Vermont has more people. North Dakota has more people. Wyoming is America's beautiful, empty, forgotten middle child. And it wants to stay that way. And Washington? Washington is terrified of Wyoming becoming trendy. Because if people figure out what Wyoming is offering, game over. Here's what Wyoming offers. No income tax, no corporate income tax, castle doctrine laws that would make medieval knights jealous, constitutional carry for weapons, and so much land that you can buy 40 acres for the price of a used Camry. A Camry with some miles on it, sure. But still, think of Wyoming as the Minecraft creative mode of America. You want to build something weird? Go for it. You want to start a business the government forgot to regulate because they didn't know it could exist. Probably legal. You want to own things the ATF doesn't even have classification codes for yet. Wyoming's basically like, show me the receipt and we're good. The state legislature meets for 40 days every year, 40 days. Then they go home. They go back to ranching, running businesses, living actual lives. They're not career politicians. They're citizens who occasionally govern, which is exactly what the founders intended. And the business environment? Wyoming is where corporations go to be born. It's the Delaware of the West, except with mountains. LLCs are cheap, easy, and private. You can register a company online in 20 minutes. Privacy protections are stronger than Swiss banks used to be. International businesses incorporate in Wyoming just to access American banking without American scrutiny. But here's the dark secret that keeps Wyoming empty. It's also boring. Aggressively boring. The kind of boring that makes Iowa look like Ibiza. The most exciting thing in Wyoming is Yellowstone, and that's mostly tourists. The rest is wind, sagebrush, and geological formations that are beautiful for about 30 seconds before you run out of adjectives. Entertainment is DIY. Culture is optional. Your idea of a wild Saturday night might involve stargazing because there's literally nothing else to do and the sky is impossibly clear because there's no light pollution for 100 miles, and that's their defense mechanism. That's the moat. Because if Wyoming had beaches, nightlife, coffee shops that stayed open past 6 p.m., it'd be over. Everyone would move there. Austin would empty out. California would hemorrhage tech workers. And suddenly, Cheyenne becomes the next Denver, which is exactly what Wyoming residents don't want. Punchline: freedom tastes like sagebrush and wind. But hey, at least the government's not watching, because they're too busy not existing. Where billionaires hide and no one asks questions. You've never thought about South Dakota, be honest. If someone asked you to name the Dakota states, you'd guess North Dakota first, maybe guess Montana on accident. South Dakota is flyover country's flyover state. That's on purpose. Because South Dakota is where the ultra-rich park their money when they're tired of the IRS asking intrusive questions. It's the Delaware of trusts, the Cayman Islands of the Midwest, the place where generational wealth goes to hibernate, multiply, and never, ever get taxed. No income tax, no inheritance tax, no capital gains tax. And, this is the big one, perpetual dynasty trusts that let your great-great-great-grandkids inherit your fortune without the government ever touching it. It's financial immortality, legal financial immortality, the kind of thing that should require a quest in a fantasy novel. Other states limit trust to 90 years, maybe 120. South Dakota, forever, literally forever. You can create a trust today that will outlive empires. Here's the comparison. South Dakota is like a save point in a video game. Except instead of saving your progress, you're saving your bloodline's wealth from taxation, inflation, and the inevitable collapse of civilizations. It's estate planning for dynasties. And it's not just Americans. Foreign billionaires use South Dakota trusts. Chinese millionaires, Russian oligarchs, Middle Eastern royalty. Because South Dakota has stronger privacy laws than Switzerland ever did, the state won't tell other countries who owns what. They won't cooperate with foreign investigations unless absolutely legally forced. Your money is safe, hidden, and growing. Sioux Falls has become a mini financial hub, not because of banks, because of trust companies, firms that exist purely to manage the wealth of people who will never visit South Dakota, will never see Mount Rushmore, will never taste Chislik, which is South Dakota's only culinary contribution, and honestly isn't that great. But here's the ugly reality that makes this whole thing gross. This only works if you're already rich. If you're middle class, South Dakota is just a state with corn and Mount Rushmore and wind that never stops. You don't benefit from the trust laws because you don't have trust-level money. It's economic feudalism with good branding, a two-tier system where billionaires get constitutional protections and everyone else gets to work at the truck stop. Yet Washington can't stop it. Because it's legal. Because states have rights. Because South Dakota isn't technically doing anything wrong. They're just doing it better than everyone else, more aggressively, with lawyers who figured out every loophole in the federal tax code. And if average people figured out South Dakota's legal infrastructure, if middle-class families started using the same strategies as billionaires, if financial literacy reached the point where everyone knew these tools existed, the entire federal tax system implodes, revenue collapses, inheritance taxes vanish, and suddenly, generational wealth isn't just for the rich. It's for anyone who can afford a good lawyer and a P.O. box in Sioux Falls. Punchline, South Dakota, where billionaires and bison roam free. One of them pays taxes. Hint, it's not the billionaires. What happens in Nevada doesn't get taxed in Nevada. Nevada is the chaos state. The state where America's ID runs wild and no one stops it. The state that said, yeah, we'll allow that, to basically everything other states banned. No income tax. Gun laws looser than a Tarantino movie marathon. Legal gambling everywhere. Legal brothels in some counties. Legal cannabis. A culture so libertarian that even the libertarians occasionally look around and go, okay, maybe we went too far. Maybe the 24-hour drive-through wedding chapel staffed by an Elvis impersonator is pushing it. But here's what makes Nevada special. It's not just Las Vegas. That's the misconception that keeps people from moving there. Vegas is the brand, the marketing, the neon distraction. But most of Nevada is something else entirely. Reno exists, actually exists, with tech companies, normal jobs, housing that doesn't cost $1 million. Carson City is the capital, and you've literally never thought about it. Elko has miners, ranchers, and people who prefer mountains to slot machines. Nevada is geographically massive and culturally diverse and really doesn't care what you do as long as you're not boring about it. Think of Nevada as America's pressure valve, the place where all the things other states banned just exist, openly, with neon signs and operating licenses. It's what happens when a state decides that prohibition doesn't work, regulation is expensive, and freedom is actually profitable. Here's the metaphor. Nevada is that friend who never grew out of their wild phase, who still parties on weekdays, who makes questionable decisions but somehow always lands on their feet. And you know what? They're happier for it, richer too. Because while everyone else was clutching pearls, Nevada was collecting tax revenue from vices. The constitutional protections are real. Nevada has some of the strongest property rights in America, homesteading laws that still work, water rights that predate statehood, gun rights that make other states nervous, and a general attitude of do whatever you want as long as you're not hurting anyone that used to be called American values before we got weird about everything. Business formation is easy. Nevada LLCs are second only to Wyoming in privacy and protection. No corporate income tax means companies actually keep their profits. And unlike other tax havens, Nevada has infrastructure, real cities, airports, internet that works. But here's the contradiction that's brutal and real. Nevada is also a desert, a beautiful, deadly, expensive desert, where water costs more than gasoline, where summer temperatures regularly hit 115 degrees, which is hot enough to make you understand why ancient civilizations worshipped the sun out of fear, not love. Lake Mead is disappearing. The Colorado River is a political nightmare. Climate change isn't a debate in Nevada. It's a daily reality affecting water rights, agriculture, and whether anyone will be able to live there in 50 years. And the cost of living, rising fast. Because California discovered Nevada. Because remote work made Reno viable. Because people figured out that living in Nevada and working for a California company is a 13% raise just from tax savings. Washington doesn't worry too much about Nevada because Nevada markets itself as Sin City. It's self-quarantining. Self-selecting. You go there to visit, not to stay. The state's entire brand is what happens here stays here, which implies temporary, tourist, not permanent resident. But if people realize Nevada is also a constitutional fortress with no income tax, strong property rights, and some of the loosest regulations in America, that Las Vegas is actually just Reno with better PR, that you can live in the mountains, work remotely, and never pay state income tax while enjoying every freedom the Constitution promises. Yeah, that's when DC starts sweating. That's when migration becomes a problem. That's when Nevada's 2 senators start mattering a lot more. Punchline, come for the slots. Stay because you legally can do whatever you want, and the government's too busy at the craps table to notice. Leave because it's 118 degrees and your AC bill is $600. So let's escalate this. Let's talk about what happens when the secret stops being secret. Right now, these 5 states are America's secret menu. The off-grid option, the break glass in case of tyranny backup plan, the constitutional escape hatch that only 5% of Americans know exists. But what happens when remote work makes Alaska viable for tech workers? When Starlink reaches the Brooks Range? When someone making $200K for a San Francisco company realizes they can live in Fairbanks, pay 0 state income tax, and get paid by the state to exist? What happens when crypto billionaires realize South Dakota's trust laws? When Bitcoin millionaires figure out they can park their wealth in perpetual dynasty trusts that will outlive their bloodline? When an entire generation of digital nomads discovers that financial sovereignty is just a P.O. box away? What happens when Wyoming's emptiness becomes its biggest selling point? When solitude becomes luxury? When people realize that boredom is actually peace and wind is just free white noise? What happens when New Hampshire's tax model goes viral on TikTok? When Gen Z figures out that living free means keeping your money? When no income tax stops being a boomer talking point and starts being a life hack? What happens when Nevada's chaos becomes normal? When legal cannabis, legal gambling, and legal autonomy stop being vices and start being constitutional rights that other states denied? You get a sovereignty shift, a real one. You get states with power, economic power, political power, the kind of power that doesn't come from federal funding or corporate headquarters or being on a coast. Power that comes from people choosing to be there, voting with their feet, moving their families, relocating their businesses. And that's Washington's nightmare. The nightmare that keeps bureaucrats up at night. Because if states can thrive without federal dependency, if they can grow without conforming, if they can prove that freedom and prosperity aren't opposites, the whole game changes. Federal power diminishes, state sovereignty returns, and suddenly, the Constitution starts working the way it was supposed to. But let's be honest for 30 seconds. Let's do the thing YouTube never does and acknowledge complexity. These states aren't utopias. They have problems, real problems. Alaska has the highest suicide rate in America. Isolation kills, darkness kills. Alcoholism thrives in emptiness. Wyoming is losing young people because there's nothing for them there. No jobs that don't involve extraction industries. No culture that doesn't involve trucks. New Hampshire has a heroin epidemic because cheap freedom still leaves people empty, and opioids fill voids. South Dakota's trust laws enable global corruption. Russian oligarchs hiding stolen money. Chinese officials sheltering bribe funds. It's constitutional, sure, but it's also gross. Nevada has homelessness, addiction, and all the problems that come with building cities and deserts that were never meant to sustain human life. Freedom doesn't solve everything. Low taxes don't cure loneliness. Constitutional rights don't fix broken communities. But here's the thing. These problems exist everywhere. California has homelessness and the highest taxes. New York has opioid deaths and income taxes. Illinois has corruption and property taxes that never end. The difference is what you get in exchange. And in these 5 states, you get autonomy. You get to try. You get to succeed or fail on your own terms, without 18 regulatory agencies deciding your fate. That's the trade. That's the deal. Freedom for infrastructure, autonomy for amenities, independence for isolation. Whether it's worth it, that's your choice, which is kind of the whole point. So there you have it. 5 states, 5 loopholes, 5 constitutional cheat codes, 5 reasons Washington hopes you never pack your bags, update your driver's license, and become a problem for their revenue projections. New Hampshire, cold freedom with tax benefits. Alaska, paid to disappear. Wyoming, empty enough to be yourself. South Dakota, rich people tricks for everyone. Nevada, chaos as constitutional right. They're not perfect. They're not for everyone. Some of them are freezing. Some are boring. Some are morally complicated. All of them have wind. Constant, relentless, soul-crushing wind. But they're there, waiting, quietly operating outside the system, while the system pretends they don't exist, growing slowly, protecting freedoms other states forgot about, proving that maybe, just maybe, leaving people alone actually works. And if you're sitting there thinking, maybe I should check these out? If you're Googling real estate prices, if you're calculating tax savings, good. That's the whole point. That's the crack in the system. That's how change happens. One moving truck at a time. Next video, we're talking about the one city the federal government actually tried to erase from the map multiple times and failed every single time. Click now before I send you to Guam without sunscreen and make you start a coconut farm. Stay free, stay weird, stay informed, and remember, the algorithm is always watching, but so are you, and you have options. 5 of them. Waiting. Ready. Go.